Yeah, hi peeps, Terse back on Squat Box again, and once again I'm going on about American politics at the moment. Obama's come out and divulged his, well, his new remedy, his new idea for federal budget for 2013, and involved in that is CPI, and personally myself, as a socialist capitalist, I see it as a huge faux pas. There's no way that you should be looking at cutting, because that's what it is. It's basically a cut for people in the future who receive pensions, and I think that is a terrible way to go. When the only way that I see that's sensible and reforming the pension scheme, the national federal pension scheme in America, is to raise the cap on the payments into the scheme. It's not as if it's never been done. Normally, this is the way that you deal with income and outgoings. For instance, here in the United Kingdom, Margaret Thatcher, that genius of economics, who ran Britain with a 60% tax rate on the rich for nearly 10 years of her prime ministership, and only in the last year did she reduce it to 40%. But during the period that she reduced it to 40%, and in order to offset the loss of earnings, she doubled VAT, which means every single person in the whole country was paying double value-added tax for every single item that was taxed by value-added tax. So she reduced the rich people's tax by 20%, and she increased everybody's tax by 50%. That's how the tax system works, and if Obama feels that the only way that he can control the growing pension payments by the American nation is by reducing the amount that they pay to the pensioners, forcing some of them to actually live below the poverty line, I would say that wasn't a democratic or progressive move. It's not even a social move, and let's face it, we all live in a society, and in order to make sure that everyone within that society lives at a reasonable living standard, we depend on our government to make payments to people who fall below what we would say is the national average of poverty. And yet, as rich as America is, as rich as the United Kingdom is, we still find politicians willing to say, well, we'll pay this much and tax this little, and if some people fall below what we consider the poverty line, well, that's just too bad. There's nothing we can do about it, because we're not willing to change that calculation. We're not willing to charge the very rich a little bit more in order to balance the very poor. I think it's a bad decision by Obama to go down this road. Why is it it's only Conservatives that ever have real strong leaders? I mean, Margaret Thatcher, don't get me wrong, she was a very strong leader. She was determined to get her way. She got her way, and she basically decimated the British economy. She decimated the British society. She decimated and basically done away with most of the social contract that the country had with its people. And I'm seeing this happen in America. It's happened in America over the last 30-40 years, a gradual erosion of the compact that the American government had with the people, the society, the communities within this country, and I don't think it's going to work out well for either the Democrats or the Republicans. because the Democrats are going to lose some of the strong support they've had over the last sort of 4, 5, 6 years. And the Republicans are going to be relegated to a fringe party. And you're going to have a larger amount of independents. And eventually what will happen is the large amount of independents will find some way to form an independent party. I really do believe that. I think you're going to see Democrats, in say 10, 15 years, you're going to have a Democratic Party. You're going to have an independent party. And the Republicans will be a minority party, disappearing into the history books of American politics, and basically becoming like the Liberal Democrats in the United Kingdom. Here in the United Kingdom we basically have 3 parties. We have hundreds of parties really, but some of them are like, one candidate stands in one area and never gets elected and probably loses the money they post to become a candidate. But in Britain we have basically 3 parties. We have the Conservatives, we have the Liberal Democrats, and we have the Labour Party. No, I'm talking nationally, not so much in Scotland, because we also have the Scottish National Party, and in Wales you have a Welsh National Party. And in Ireland I believe that although they've got 2 main parties, there's also a couple of fringe parties, like the Green Party, who actually get quite a few votes. So we have a multi-party sort of system in Britain. But in England, basically, they went from a 2-party system, which was Conservative and Labour, to a 3-party system, Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats. And you could call the Liberal Democrats the independent party. They don't support the Conservatives' point of view on all the policies that they put forward, and they don't support Labour and all the policies they put forward. They're sort of in the middle. They like to pick and choose, cherry pick some of the Conservative ideas and cherry pick some of the Labour ideas, and maybe fudge the matter with a couple of ideas of their own which nobody really thinks will work and they've never been tried because they've never been in power. Maybe that will change in the future, but not in the next 10 or 15 years. But I do believe in America you're going to see a change in the next 10 or 15 years. You're going to have a third party. It's going to be an independent party. Maybe it'll be the independent United States or independent America or something like that, And they will be competing against a dying Republican Party, going the way of the Whigs, and a shrunk Democratic Party. That's the way I kind of see the American system going. As I say, 10, 15 years, probably 10, 15 years we'll see maybe the spawn, the seed of it. But within the next 30 years, you will definitely have at least 3 parties in America. And that's going to be a huge change for it. That's going to throw America into a European type political system. And then we'll see how America deals with what Europe's been dealing with for the last 200 years. You're a very young nation in America. You've no idea of how lucky we've been to have 250 years of, just a 2-party system. But I've got to say, a 2-party system can't survive. It certainly can't survive in the modern age. That's certain. And another thing that you'll see coming, more to the fore in the future, over the next 15, 20 years, is you will definitely arrive at a national health system. You will arrive at a more even-handed immigration system. But you also end up with a more fascist and totalitarian infrastructure, police system, probably more fascist and more totalitarian than in Europe. Although I do see certain fringe countries in Europe becoming more fascist and totalitarian, but they will be controlled by the majority governmental groups in the EU who know that going down the fascist and totalitarian route has never worked for Europe and won't, and they will be controlled by being forced to be on the fringes. Small countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, maybe not so much Portugal because they are definitely more socialist, but Spain has definitely got a fascist streak. Greece definitely has a fascist streak. Some of the Balkanized countries who have been brought in through the Eastern expansion by Europe will also have a fascist and totalitarianish sort of governmental look. They've lived through it for over 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, some of them, and they will also be competing in Europe against what we see as a pejorative democratic system. And the bulwark of Europe will be Germany, France, and the northern countries of Europe, including Britain. And it's more the southern nations of Europe that will, Italy as well, will become more fascist, more totalitarian, and that will be the swinging back and forwards within the European Union, the European government. But we will balance that out because we are a conglomerate of many nations. But America is one nation, and as the federalisation, the republic falls away to federalisation, you will find a split between rather than 2 parties, 3 parties, but definitely a state-wise fascist totalitarian separation between some of the northern and mid-American states and definitely the southern states. That will change obviously as you move through the next century. But I think getting into the middle of this century, America is going to go through a terrible flux, similar to what Europe went through over the last 100 years with the First World War, Second World War, and the individual wars, internal wars within some of the nation states in Europe. You're going to have individual states in America try to force statehood, state legislation against federal legislation. They will eventually lose. Federal law will win out. But over the next 30, 40 years, America is going to have that horrendous sort of tearing apart and division within the states, which Europe saw as nations in Europe fought against each other for the same reasons. The fascist and totalitarian ideas. A rise will be seen by the fundamentalist right wing, Christians mostly, but you will also bring in what I would say is atheistic white supremacy will play a part in it as well. I can only say that these are things that I've looked at and thought of and processed through my mind. They are the way that, if you look back in history, that large bodies of people with segregated smaller subgroups within them go through. There is a rise and fall of this political ideology and religious political ideology, because I mean religion is not just about religion. They don't stick to just thinking of why are we here, what's our purpose. They eventually try and take over governments, try and take over the governmental duties of either states or nations, and they rise and fall in a pattern. And if you look back in history, you can see that pattern. It often depends on individual leaders of groups. Often it depends on a group mentality of certain majority controlled areas. And you'll see that even now in America. Certain states are definitely red, certain states are definitely blue, some are purple. But you can see that the diminution of red in some states turning purple, and you can see the growth of blue and purple states. But there's always those certain states which are predominantly red, always have been, and are projected to always be in the near to middle distance in the future. And they will be the the founding birthplaces of the rise of fascism and totalitarianism, as those people with those ideas feel they're being squeezed in certain states. They will up stakes and move to states where they feel that they're going to be more comfortable, and people of like mind live. As I say, that will probably happen over the next 15, 20 years, 30 years. And it's a view that I have of mankind. They say that the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice. Well, that's pretty true, but it's not a straight line. It's not a straight curve. It has wobbles and bends and sometimes offshoots that burst off of it and drag everybody else to their direction for a while before they're snuffed out. Europe is going through a convulsive process at the moment. Socialism, and I don't mean socialism as in a socialist communist. I mean socialism just in the way that humanity is grown up, being if you live in a family of 7 or 8 people, you pretty much get on each other, although you argue about things. But you pretty much would protect each other from danger if you could see it and warn each other if you see something bad going to happen, And that's the same in small communities. You might not like every other family in the village, but you wouldn't want to see any harm come to them. That's the whole premise of a community, and that extends into nations. A nation, certain towns have competition between each other, but you wouldn't want to see them conquered by an invader because you know that you're next. So you would go and help support them and defeat the outside invader. So we do live in a social community. But it's when there's no danger, when you think you're only competing against your neighbour, that's when we have the rise of fascism and totalitarianism. The idea that I know best, and if only everybody did what I thought, the whole world would be perfect. You get this from religions. If everybody was Catholic, there would be no religious fights. If everybody was Muslim, there would be no religious fights. But that's not true either, because certain Catholics hate other Catholics, certain Protestants hate other Protestants, certain Muslims hate other Muslims. We've seen this around the world. But this is the ideology. If we were all just thought like me, the world would be perfect, And I pretty much got out of that idea when I was in my late teens and 20s. Thatcher was one of the people who taught me that way, because even in Thatcher, the Conservatives didn't agree with Thatcher, not all of them. They fought cat and tooth and nail, like cats and dogs. They fought, but they were brought into line by the power and control that she had within her government. And you see that within parties in America as well. The Democrats almost broke apart 30, 40 years ago, was it? And then the Republicans are now breaking apart, The difference is that the Democrats were able to find a strong enough leader who had a sensible idea of how to reform the Democratic Party and pull it back together. Unfortunately, the Republicans, I don't see anyone strong enough to pull that cat house back together, There just isn't. There is not a single Republican who has any sensible ideas who can speak to the crazies in his party and bring them into line. And he has no way of threatening them with never getting re-elected, to bring them into line. They are broken. They're a broken party, and I think it's an unfixable break within the Republican Party, and I don't see any possible change other than a three-party system within the next 15, 20 years in America. And that might be one of the best things that can happen to America, to actually become a true democratic nation. A nation that allows more than black and white to govern their political system. Because that's what it seems to be between the Democrats and the Republicans now. It's black or it's white. and yet there's a whole swathe of independents, possible swing voters, in America now. I mean, it could be that only 22% of the electorate are truly conservative, Republican, conservative, and it could be that there's only about 30% that are truly progressive Democrats, and so that leaves 45% in the centre who are basically centrist, moderate conservatives and centrist, moderate Democrats, and that's a large party for becoming independent. And if they ever did split from Democrats and Republicans and became an independent party, they would probably be the majority party in America. You could find an independent American party out electing and outperforming the Democrats and the Republicans. It could also mean that the political system in America might have to change, rather than being just a majorative election sort of system, that they might actually find themselves sometime in the next 30, 40, 50 years with, thinking and looking at the history of Europe and saying, well, if nobody gets more than 50% of the vote, then two of the smaller parties, the Republicans with their 22% and the Democrats with the 32%, maybe they could join together and have what we have now in Britain, at the moment, with the Conservatives and Democrats coalition. Maybe in 40 or 50 years, 30 or 40 years, you could have a coalition government formed together. The two parties that hate each other the most, forming together to form a coalition in order to defeat the independent party. I'm just saying, these are things that I look and think are possible futures, for America and Britain. I don't see that Britain's going to remain the United Kingdom forever. I don't know if next year the Scottish National Party will win the vote to become an independent nation. I sometimes hope they will, and I sometimes still have doubts. But on the whole, I hope we do, because I think the idea of Scotland, not just the idea of Scotland being an independent nation again, but I think that the real solid fundamental truth of a nation having responsibility for itself and being responsible to the people that live within the borders of that nation is a fact that we can't deny is the best thing for each nation. There is probably a problem with some countries who were, the idea I come up with is balkanised, because the Balkans were split into several individual nations by the conquerors of that area over time, several times over. It was split and split and split, until I think even the nations in that area no longer remember the original borders or the political, ideological or religious connections that they used to have with their neighbours. You've seen that as well in the Middle East. A lot of that is because of the balkanisation, the divisions, artificial divisions made by other nations that conquered them and decided to split them between themselves for financial gain and for resource distribution. And I just think that for all the benefits that the United Kingdom has had by being a United Kingdom, it was a place and time when it was beneficial, even though it was forced upon some of the nations, and it was an accepted premise that it was best for us at the time by the people who ruled their nations at the time and weren't willing to completely lose them, because that was basically what faced them: total annihilation or accedance to becoming part of a United Nations, United Kingdom. And I think that time is gone now, it's past. I think it's time that perhaps Northern Ireland perhaps even joined Ireland and became a nation again. I think it's possible that Wales could become a single nation by itself, but might still have some benefits to be connected with England. So that would be the United Kingdom back then, in the future rather. It would be England and Wales. And I think it's time that Scotland really did leave the Union and became an independent nation, and looked to the future for its own path, as a nation, as part of the world. And I think America as well, you will probably see this as well. I mean, I'm not sure it will come to this, but possibly in the next couple hundred years, you could probably see a divided America, North America, probably divided west from east, and west and east from south, and perhaps even an individual division as well, with a central North America. So maybe 4 nations in North America, discounting Canada, but I'm talking about North America, the United States of America, splitting up into central, east, west and south. But that's a long, long, long distance off. But it does seem to be the way that nations go as fortunes of nations change. Anyway, I think I've rambled on enough and given you more than my mind fart ideas. It should probably be aired, you know what I mean? But I'm hoping that some of what I'm saying, gets through to people for today's understanding of politics. We can't just say, I love the way this guy speaks, or I love the way that woman does her work, or oh, they're so strong, and they don't give in, and they're solid, you get an idea of the future. It doesn't mean to say you've got to believe their idea of the future, or believe that what they say is true, or believe that what they want is the right thing. I'll say one other thing. I do believe that over the next 10 years we're going to see a huge change in the understanding of financial divisions around the world. We're going to understand that corporatism is not good for the nations that are controlled by the corporate entities that exist today, and there will be a blowback on these corporations. They will be forced to understand that they can't be above nations, they can't be above the law, they can't be above the people that they think they rule over. They are not elected, they are not public servants, they have no feeling for the people that they prey upon, that is, all the people of the world. And they will not be allowed to continue this, what I see, dystopian drive towards corporate financial ownership of everything on this planet. Anyway, slàinte bá.